The 7 worst interviews on radio and television of my life as a result. And then I went home, pretty miserable. What had happened? Then I thought about it and said, gosh, we have an opportunity. She's given the impression of being so negative that people will be upset with her. Her ministers will be upset. Her civil servants will be upset. People in Parliament will be upset. We have a moral advantage. If we play this right, we can get her to come back and make concessions. And we had a word with the American president to encourage her in that regard. And it happened. She came to Dublin for a European Council about 10 days later. And we had a private talk, and she started saying, Garrett, what did I do wrong? It was a wonderful moment. and it was totally misinterpreted. It was a wee bit of a misinterpretation. For 20th of January, new proposals come from her, which advanced things, and we got stuck. So what seemed like a disaster wasn't a disaster at all. But I had to wait 24 hours, or 12 hours anyway, before I realized we had the advantage now. And we got the agreement. But the agreement was, of course, hugely misinterpreted at all. Because the unionists thought we were trying to take over Northern Ireland. Well, I was concerned that we would have a sufficient role inside Northern Ireland for nationalists to rally to this agreement sufficiently to shift the balance within the system so that Sinn Féin would have to rethink their position. That's what happened. And what convinced nationalist opinion? The unionist outrage was such that nationalists thought it must be a good agreement. Nobody even looked at the agreement was in it. And in fact, I have to say, the British weren't great at implementing some of the security clauses either. But it was great enthusiasm on the nationalist side because of the unionist reaction. And even today, unions don't understand how helpful they were by coming on the streets in large numbers. That shifted nationalist opinion, that shifted Sinn Féin, and the whole process, the peace process started as a result. Politics is more complicated than you think from outside.
Any other questions?
Yeah?
Would you agree that the 1981 hunger strikes were a turning point in development of nationalist politics?
Yes, the hunger strikes were a turning point, and for me they were a turning point. I had always felt that we should settle this issue as Irishmen together, for the Unionists and Nationalists, calling in the British to handle the matter and impose their will. Irish people, whatever their profession, didn't seem to be a great idea. That had been my view all my life. I have been writing articles on all that since 1948, disagreeing with government policy for all those decades, before I ever got into politics. But I think that. But after the hunger strikes, I was out of office then in '82 for 9 months, came back in the end of the year, and I've been, the great thing about being in opposition is you have time to think. In government, very little time to think. And reflecting on it, I realized that if I persisted in seeking a solution between two sides internally, and failing, because there was no movement on the union side, the situation could get to the point where, even with violence continuing, Sinn Féin might still get a majority in the internationalist community, in which event we could be faced conceivably with civil war, and that was the advice I was getting. Because if Sinn Féin had a majority of national support, and still being violent, they might be tempted to raise the level of violence, which they never raised to a civil war level, they always pulled back at each point. And therefore, if I persisted in taking my, on a naive view, we should deal with the unionists and not bring in the British big guns, I could lead to a far worse situation. So I had to reverse my commitment, my views, and decide, no, the time has come, we'll have to talk to the British. They'll have to move in some way to get movement in the situation. And so my whole position was radically changed, but I was trying to have to say it in that way. Not perhaps what people intended, but that's a big terror of me. And so it did lead, the increase in support for Sinn Féin meant that the southern state, concerned for its security and security of the island as a whole, was forced to shift policy and to put the pressure on Britain to change policy, which was done to a sufficient extent that unionists reacted sufficiently negatively for Sinn Féin to react the way we wanted, and the process began. But it was a seminal thing. Without the hunger strikes, I don't think there would have been the increase in Sinn Féin support in the 80s, which really did force a change of policy. To be quite frank about it.
I think maybe we have a question from Thorn Hall. Okay.
Northern Ireland politicians have received a lot of bad press recently from Southern politicians in particular. Now, in light of the Liam Muller and more recently the Micheál Martin affair, Do you think Southern politicians are in any position to criticise Northern politicians?
It's very unwise of any politician to criticize any other politician. In any other country or at home, it can come back and hit you. Anything you say, there's always a true quote may come back to some guy. And probably enough deficiencies in our system. But I have to say that there is a problem now of understanding. I think that the way events have turned out, the length of time the peace process hasn't reached a conclusion, has certainly disillusioned people in the South. And I think there's a bigger division between national South and North now than in the past, which is very worrying. Because it's very difficult for Southern politicians to understand the way Northern politics has gone. In the South, Sinn Féin gets support in certain areas near the border in North Kerry, which are traditionally Republican, and they get support also in working class disadvantaged areas of Dublin, where the other parties have failed to do the job of looking after people properly, in my view, and they're left a vacuum. And we can understand that. What is difficult for people in the South to understand is the shift in opinion on the national side in Northern Ireland itself, and indeed on the Unionist side. If you're not in the situation, it's very hard to understand why people move to more extreme positions when you're getting progress towards peace. Logically, to think, well, things are getting a bit better, people are not being murdered by the same way on either side, and progress being made, you expect people to get more moderate. And I can understand the complex motivations that lead to this changing, but most people don't understand that. They see it as irrational. And that is meant, I think, and there's no public evidence of this, but I think anyone in the South would tell you the same thing, that there is a bigger gulf between Northern and Southern nationalists than there was at this time. And that's worrying, because a gulf between anybody else is worrying, whoever it is, nationalist unions, or within nationalism, or within unionism, it doesn't help. So there are problems now. If, after this election, the move that Jerry Adams has sought takes place, and there is progress towards a solution. And I did think Peter Robinson's speech yesterday, which was a very serious modification of what Mr. Paisley had said, did open the way to movement later in the year. If that happens, we may come out the far end all right. But at the moment, it's a bad moment at this stage because of the incomprehension or difficulty of comprehending which people in the South have, which prevents them going. And of course, we have been divided by a lot over a long period of time. There was always divisions. Daniel O'Connell wouldn't come north. Wasn't that come north 170 years ago, long before partition. So there are always north-south divisions in the past. Nothing new about that. But they are more acute at present because they are within nationalism as also between nationalism and unionism.
Maybe there's a question from Limerick Christer or Foyle up at the back here.
Yes, do you think the SDLP and the Ulster Unionists vote will hold in the next election?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Do you think the SDLP and the Ulster Unionists vote will hold in the next election?
I don't know. It's a great mistake. Well, it's a mistake anyway to forecast elections in any circumstances. For the Southern to forecast a Northern election when there's a certain incomprehension in any event between us and the North would be very sensible. I haven't debated it, I don't know. Last time I put a bet in an election, I lost. I never do it again. Lost a lot of money. I never bet in my life after 1949, except once on a by-election that Fine Gael would win and we lost it. I never bet again after that.
Question for Limerick Christer here in the model room.
Do you foresee a united Ireland in our lifetime, and if so, how will it come about?
Well, it might be in your lifetime, it won't be in mine. It's not impossible, but a lot would need to happen. And unfortunately, your politics are so political, nobody ever discusses economics. Now, Northern Ireland has now become, it was always dependent on Britain to a degree. It never could pay the full imperial contribution way back in 2030. But the dependence of Northern Ireland on Britain is now huge. I haven't done a recent analysis of it, but I'm told it's possibly 5 to 6 billion a year. It looks as if the transfers from Britain through the social welfare system add up to about 20% of your national output. The result is that we have progressed very rapidly economically. I did the first study ever of North-South economies. You'll find it in Studies, Winter 1956 journal, and I was able to show, for the first time there was a national account for Northern Ireland, that at that time, Northern Ireland produced 37.5% of the total output of this island. What's the figure today? I calculated 2 years ago for another book I was writing, and I was so astonished at the figure, I rang the chief statistician at Stormont and told him the figures. Would that be right? Oh, that's right, 23.5%. There's a huge change that's taken place. The South's grown so rapidly, the North so slowly, that you now account for less than a quarter of output here as against almost 40% 50 years ago. And the degree of dependence on Northern Ireland is such, and dependence on the public sector is such, that it's only one comparison in Europe now today, East Germany. The dependence of East Germany and West Germany, which 15 years of unity haven't resolved. And there's a huge problem. In fact, the whole German economy, well, the ratio of East Germany to West Germany is about 1 to 3 or something, whereas in Northern Ireland to Britain is much less, so the British don't realise this or notice it. But it's a huge degree of dependence. Now, your living standards are still slightly higher than ours. That's because of the huge transfers from Britain. But your output per head is 20% less than ours at this stage. And that's the real Northern Ireland problem. When you stop fighting about politics, you've got to get down to economics. If I had been David Trimble, and I was negotiating half the unions, I would have insisted that I will not sign any damned agreement unless we get the same right to a 12.5% corporation tax as the South has. So you can compete. Instead, the political attitude of unions and politicians was, we want to stay close to Britain, we mustn't change anything, we mustn't get nearer to the South, even in tax rates. And he was absolutely opposed to any such idea. So if your politicians are totally opposed to anything beneficial to your own area, you have a bit of a problem economically. And as nobody even mentions this or talks about it, or is never referred to anywhere in the papers, I worry about the North of Ireland. And of course there's no way in which the South's going to take over 5 or 6 billion of a subsidy. It's all right, the British fork it out, they're 15 times bigger than us. But it'd be the equivalent, the British paying 15 times as much. So, I mean, if this became an issue, who's going to vote from the South if they're told to increase taxes by that huge amount to pay for it? So we really have to deal with this political problem, which is soluble at this stage, and then address the economic problem and try to build up the Northern economy. When I wrote my first book on Northern Ireland in 1972, I then said that I believed that in 25 years, North and South could catch up on Britain economically. We're both from the behind that time. And then there would be no subsidies involved, so that although you'd have the political problem, at least it wouldn't be an economic obstacle for Irish unity. But now the economic obstacle is hugely increased. And maybe we'll someday solve the political problem. Maybe people in Northern Ireland will want to join the South at some stage, I don't know. My grandchildren's time perhaps. But it won't happen if you don't solve the economic problem. And you are now, like East Germany, you're the 2 economic basket cases of Europe. And it'd be a help if somebody occasionally mentioned the fact, or addressed it, or thought about it. And that's the job for your generation. Forget about United Ireland. Anyway, get on with whether you want United Ireland or don't. You should want to be prosperous. You should want to catch up with, not be lagging behind the South. So that's the task for your generation to address. And then if you or your children or grandchildren want to change the situation, so be it when it happens, but that's a long way down the line at this stage.
Another question from the college up here.
Why was it not possible to negotiate the Good Friday Agreement in the 1980s, given that Seamus Mallon presented Sunningdale for slow learners?
Well, we did negotiate it. The Sunningdale. It's exactly the same agreement, power sharing in Northern Ireland, Council of Ireland, but the details are different. The 2 elements are there exactly as the Friday Agreement. But at that time, unionists were not prepared to accept it, and it was brought down by the workers' strike and by having a weak British government unsure of itself. You see, the problem wasn't helped by the fact that Harold Wilson came to power at that point. And he was not a strong, at that stage, maybe early on, his first period of government, he was not a strong leader. And his first thought was, let's look at all possible solutions, including withdrawal. Now, we weren't told that, but I guessed the British were considering withdrawal. Now, whatever they might think, as far as Irish governments are concerned, the last thing they want is withdrawal leading to civil war and chaos in Northern Ireland, which spread into our area too. And John approached me at that time to say, would you ask the British for an assurance that I'm going to withdraw? I said, no, John, I won't. Because if I say that to them, it's a signal to them, oh, the Irish accept we might withdraw. It'll precipitate it. So I refused John at the time. He wasn't happy about it. And the only thing that actually happened was that Wilson set up a group of 3 people to look at all options, including withdrawal. I feared this and guessed it was on the card. And the only thing we did was that the man in charge of that group rang our Deputy Cabinet Secretary one day about another matter altogether. At the end of the discussion, our Deputy Cabinet Secretary said, and this man told me this himself at the meeting in London a few years ago, said, you wouldn't be thinking of doing anything drastic, would you, Bernard? He said, what do you mean? He thought, we couldn't know. There's only 3 of them in the secret. How could we know? I just guessed. I said, what do you mean? And our man said, don't, and put down the phone. That was the only thing we did. It's as near as we could get to doing what John wanted. But to go beyond that would be the signal to the British. The Irish expecting us to leave.
What I wanted was an agreement before you withdrew.
I say, well,
So that we wouldn't have
agreement?
to... Well, if they had pulled out, you rightly said if they'd pulled out without any agreement about how the North was governed, there'd been the most terrible civil war in our history.
yeah, but see, you believe that an agreement would solve that. I believe that once the signal was given, all hell would break loose and there was no agreement of any kind. So we had a different interpretation of what might happen. It was a legitimate disagreement between politicians. As it happened eventually, and the British abandoned the idea. But we had a very worrying time. When I saw Kissinger in January of 1978 on behalf of the European Union, in the first contact between the EU and America on political and foreign policy issues, in the car privately with him going to a service for journalists, I raised it with him and said, look, for the British think of withdrawing. It's unlikely, but if they did, we'd have to ask you to intervene because you could have absolute chaos. And Chinese or Cubans, anybody, Russians could intervene. He said, his wife was in the car with me, with us, said, never get involved in Ireland, Henry. But he agreed in those circumstances he liked. But, and in the spring of 75, the British government was talking to Sinn Féin, allegedly, IRA. We were not told the truth. The ambassador came in 3 times in a row with different stories of what they were saying, each time saying that something we had not been told. I mean, saying it's a different story, so that we knew that what told the first time was wrong. And that's why we were so worried. And during that year, Merlin Rees wouldn't see me. Refused to have any contact with me, because he was talking to the IRA and didn't want me asking questions about that.
We're short in time here, so we'll go to the next question. Up here in the audience.
If you were Taoiseach today, what would you do to get Stormont working again? And Mr. Hume was still waiting against the LP.
Well, he's done everything he can to get things at the stage they're at. But he answers for himself. I think what our government are doing, I was a little worried when it looked for a moment as if the 2 governments and the DUP were willing, subject to the silly photograph idea, with respect, which is irrelevant, were willing to settle without an IRA declaration of criminality. But if that was the intention of our 2 governments, and it looked as it might have been, that was dealt with by Mary Harney and Michael McDowell challenging that, and the government changed their position. And once our Taoiseach insisted that criminality should be tackled under pressure of PDs, Blair had to modify his position. Because, of course, our 2 governments are united in our objective, but slightly different agendas. The British government's primary concern is no more bombing in Britain. The Irish government's concern is no more criminality from paramilitaries in Ireland. And therefore, in a sense, it's an obstacle at the moment. It's the Irish government more than the British government.
Maybe again, we'll go to the next question up here, just in the back corner.
On an economic view, do you think that the UK should join the Euro, particularly because the North and South are physically connected?
Well, that's not the reason they do it. It'd be helpful to us if they did. I have my currency in my pocket, we don't much use up here at the moment. Absentarian would work. But I would like Britain to join the Euro. The question of at what level is not a matter of opinion, but I think it's unfortunate. It would be very hard to get them to do so. John, you would come in there with the other question.
Just common sense to join the Euro, because if you're in a single market, single currency is common sense.
Yeah.
And given that we're all members of the European Union, the single market, if we're the one region of that, one area of that union, hasn't got the same currency, then it's going to make it more difficult for our industries and businesses because of the extra. When you change currency, it costs you money. So marketing, etc., will cost more. We're losing out because of it.
Yeah.
What do you think the main reason is for the British not joining the Euro?
The main reason is that they're ready.
I put it down to Reformation. Notice all the northern countries of Europe, which are exclusively Protestant, as distinct from Germany and Netherlands, which were mixed, have difficulties about Europe. Because the sense of division culturally under the Reformation is strong. Whereas the other countries further south, including Germany and the Netherlands, which had these religious divisions, they have been able to cope all right. So I think it goes back a long way, this.
Any other questions? Or period of again?
Do you think it would be a good idea if Fianna Fáil joined forces with the SLP? And who in the north do you think would be a good partner for Fine Gael?
I've never thought that a good thing for the SDLP to join with any party in the South. The strength of the SDLP lay in the fact that they worked all parties, as John Christian. You needn't tell me, I know. And I mean, if they ever took sides of one or the other, that would weaken bipartisanship in the South. And bipartisanship in the South was necessary for us to pursue a consistent, coherent policy to try and get peace in the North. And very wisely, he never did that. Once, I think you, on a particular issue to do with NORAID in Britain in 1980, you did criticise Mr. High, a supporter of myself and McCluskey, in extremes. But apart from that, peace neutrality, that was very important. Because while paranoids in both of our parties thought John was the other one. I mean, all the Fine Gael guys, he's all Fianna Fáil. We all know he's Fianna Fáil. No, he's all Fine Gael. And on one occasion, I did make a suggestion that if he was worried about the fact he was identified as pro-Fianna Fáil, he could mention he was in holidays with me in the south of France and get into a gossip column somewhere. I passed that view on. And I don't know, I believe he was upset at the suggestions he made to him, but it did appear 2 weeks later, I guess.
The facts are, of course, that we took the view that in order to really resolve our problem, we had good relations with all parties in the South and worked closely with all parties. So that, and if we had taken party sides, then the North would have become a party political issue in the South and very divisive. Our real strength was the New Ireland Forum when we got all the parties together and got an agreed approach of all parties to solving it. And the strength of our progress was based on that. We wouldn't have made the progress that we made if there hadn't been a totally agreed approach from the south to the north. When you look at it, that's what you've seen, a totally agreed approach. We wouldn't have made the progress that we've made if all the 3 main parties in the Dáil had not been working closely with ourselves.
Yeah, he's absolutely right. Some has had the effect that parts of the South got irritated and the SDLP are determining our policy. But it wasn't the case. But we had the same interest in peace and stability in Northern Ireland, and the neutrality of the SDLP in Southern Parliament was crucially important for them.
Maybe we'll take one more question, just up from the back corner.
Do you regard the Anglo-Irish Agreement as a highlight of your career as a politician?
Sorry?
Do you regard the Anglo-Irish Agreement as a highlight of your career as a politician?
I suppose it is, because I always had a very strong commitment to Northern Ireland. So much so that when I proposed the forum to my cabinet, they voted it down by 12 votes to 2, because they were afraid I'd get so involved in Northern Ireland affairs I wouldn't tackle our domestic problems, which were appalling at the time. We faced a 22% borrowing rate next year because of the previous government's done. And they just, it wasn't they were hostile to the North, they just afraid I'd get too involved. I had to bring them up and twist their arms, change their votes next day to get the forum going. So it was always, and the government knew it, a very deep commitment to Northern Ireland. And insofar as it did start the process, the peace process, yes. And obviously there are other matters I'm pleased with having done in the South, and other matters I regret not having done in the South. There you are. Some things you're pleased, proud of, and some things you're not particularly proud of. But the biggest single issue was, I think, for the future of the country as a whole was the Anglo-Irish Agreement. Yes.
I think we'll just ask Mr. Jerry right here just to wrap it up for us.
Dr. Fitzgerald, Nobel laureate. Reverend President, alumni, ladies and gentlemen. First, I've got to make one clarification. I'm not the mayor of the city. A number of you thought I was wearing this chain. I am the president of the Past Pupils Union, which is celebrating, the mayor of the Past Pupils Union, John, which is this year celebrating its 75th anniversary. And just over a year ago, we planned a series of lectures on the themes of culture, change and challenge in modern Ireland and indeed in the modern world. And today I think you've seen that decision has been completely vindicated. Because we've had Dr. Fitzgerald speaking to us with a massive wealth of family experience, ranging from over a 90-year period, from being in the GPO in 1916, his mother and father, right through to the Anglo-Irish Agreement, through Sunningdale, right up to the present day. And also showing that there's life after politics, and possibly life instead of politics. I hope he's learned one thing today, and that in Derry they not only take euros, they'll take any currency off you, Doctor. Other than American Confederate dollars. In his position at the moment, as some of you may know, he's the Chancellor of the National University of Ireland. Yesterday he presided at the Senate of the University. The previous day he was in Glencree in County Wicklow, a reconciliation centre, talking about problems which are still deep-seated in Northern Ireland. And we are delighted that he has come all the way to Derry today. He's also given us an insight into history, that Mrs. Kissinger had a very important influence in American foreign policy in Ireland. But on behalf of the Union and on behalf of all of you, I would like to thank Dr. Fitzgerald for being here today. I also would like to thank John Hume, who did a marvellous job in helping to organise this series of lectures, and in particular in bringing Dr. Fitzgerald to Derry today. So on your behalf, thank you very much, Dr. Fitzgerald.
Any other matter with me, I'll be around for a while.
And finally, Doctor, before you go, can I call upon the incoming head boy of St. Columns to make a small presentation to you to mark your day in Derry?
That's me over here.
It's the equivalent of an honorary degree from St. Columns. I call upon the head boy to make a presentation to you.
Very much indeed. I've got to read. Yeah, how would you? Nicely good. Well, thank you very much indeed.
Just hold on a second. Just hold on a second. Hold on a second. Maybe get this sorted out.
Rachel, Victoria, I'm overloaded. Let's go. What? Go with me. What do you want, me?
Great question.
Everybody says there was some
Sorry, do you have a prayer here?
I'll give it anyway. She's pretty much yours. Thank you I started to like him and I started cutting myself and I don't like him. I got one Jeffrey to me and Tom.
I'm not going to someone else again, so are you?
The Scotland, Wales.